and we are recording this so that people will be able to see this who weren't able to make it today. I hope that's amenable for you, but we'll all be able to share that. So, my things aren't progressing. Oh, okay, one sec. Oh. Okay, so our first question. Traditionally, we've seen 50 to 60,000 daily in commuters. What are your strategies to address traffic and specifically about the funding? And I'm sorry, it is only 2 minutes, but so.
Okay, twofold.
And you're welcome to come up if you like. This little beast is where people can see and will record it.
Twofold. One is listen to our commuters and build the housing that they say they need, and they pay more, live in less, give up their commute to live in Boulder. That's not one bedrooms and efficiencies. Two, make it easier for people to not take their car to get to Boulder. So that's investing in a mass transit system that suits our needs rather than is controlled by RTD, and then addressing the last mile problem on both sides with solutions like B-Cycle, have park and rides where people get on the bus, and once they get to Boulder, take a B-Cycle, take an e-bike on safe bike lanes to get where they needed to go. How we pay for it is we are spending $7 million a year on fast tracks. We're spending a lot more on EcoPass, which is a complex program that people got to invest a lot of time into setting it up for their community. We're directly subsidizing RTD for a system that's not serving our needs or the needs of our commuters. So I would, just like we did with Excel, use the leverage that we have to either work with them or take that money and set up a Boulder County Transit District to actually match our commuting patterns and needs. Bing.
Okay, perfect, thank you. All right.
Sure.
So I feel like you're going to hear the same thing from all of us. So,
Good news is we all agree.
and Steve looked at my outline before he got up here, so I was going to say twofold. Twofold. One, I think, really we can address this issue with looking at what do the in-commuters want to get them out of their cars. And if they had an option to live in Boulder so we could provide more affordable housing for the in-commuters to live there, I think that would be ideal. So a recent survey was done, and most in-commuters, so what they would like to see is a wide variety of housing options like townhomes, row houses, cottage houses with a little bit of green space and an option to buy. So if we can, sort of maximize and capitalize on the down payment assistance program, that will help people get into those units. We should be looking at maximizing the use of the cash in lieu program to work with Boulder housing partners to increase the amount of housing units for lower income households. We should be looking at, with the down payment assistance program, creating the deed restricted permanently affordable housing. I obviously recognize that doesn't create the type of generational wealth that most people associate with home ownership, but it gets us closer to that point. I do believe that would help impact the amount of in-commuters that we have. We could provide a need for them. Additionally, with respect to the infrastructure program, the transit, look, we've got to be doing a better job of getting people out of their cars. I am not someone to stand up here and car shame anybody, but if we can expand on the transportation system that we have today, expansion of the EcoPass program, let's get creative. Let's look at how can we create a mini van or increase the expansion of via mobility or the HOP system where we have more control of that. Like Steve was saying, we spend $9 million a year to RTD and we're not getting the services that we need. If Google can do this for its employees, we can get creative by working with the Transportation Advisory Board and city staff, and we can do that here in Boulder. We can increase the amount of regional mini transit systems that we have to make commuting easier and more appealable for people to get them out of their cars and using alternative modes of transportation.
Thank you. And I'm so sorry, I forgot to remind you, as we get up, because people are online, please don't forget to introduce yourselves. You two next time, but Sarah,
Do I have to get up? Can I sit here?
if you'd like to sit there, that's fine.
Nah, I'd rather sit and relax. You know me, everybody knows me.
Or hear you, because there's a
What?
microphone.
What? How's that? No, that's Nicole.
And the microphone, I think it's.
Yes, my name is Tara Weiner, and yes, we all do agree on a lot. So we all know that RTD is problematic, even though aren't they supporting this work? So I don't want to put them down in any way, but I want to say that there's really not enough routes and they're cutting service. And it's problematic if you depend on the bus. What are you supposed to do? So I agree with you guys that there should be a regional transit service. And when I go door to door, almost so many people bring up eco passes and they wish they could afford one and how can they get one and what happened to the program. So I feel like that's a real need for Boulder Heights. A lot of people mention that to me. But if you're going to ask what do we do versus what do we do in the long run, I might as well dream big with my favorite topic, which is mobility hubs. And one of the reasons why I love them is I feel like I'm visualizing micro mobility stations, a secure way to lock up your bike. So let's say we have a problem with bike theft, and if there was security, for me personally, for my electric bike, I would rather lock it up with their security cameras and there's really good locks and it's being seen rather than just randomly locking it up somewhere. I don't think I would do that. So for me personally, that would get me on my bike more. So I'm sure I'm not the only one. Also, there would be car shares, dedicated parking spots for car share vehicles and micro transit, these buses and vans that you're talking about, and it would be a station with like we're somewhere where you could put your car and it would be either free or it would not cost a lot of money. Because there's two things. There's getting people to go from, let's say, Louisville to here, and then there's local. So I feel like Louisville to here or some of the regions, we really need to get micro mobility hubs. How do we pay for it? Well, we have a lot of infrastructure tax money that might be coming our way, and I don't know what it's supposed to be used for. Is that done? Did I really just talk for 2 minutes? This is something good.
So my name is Lauren Folkers, and I'm an architect and a sustainable design specialist. I think that, you know, as you guys discussed, one of the biggest ways that we help with this transportation issue into town is housing more people here. We need to make sure that we have workforce housing to help mitigate the fact that we have 6,000 in commuters. There's really all of these other things are sort of stopgap measures, but nothing can address the transportation issue like having people live near where they work. So, that's a big part of what my campaign is about. Beyond that, I think, we do need to look at the urban environment as sort of a tapestry, right? We have the buses that can potentially bring people into town. We have park and rides, where people might drive to an area, take a bus, and we need to make sure that those are connected to some of these other options that we've been talking about, e-cycles, Lime scooters, to make sure that we have a network of options that really fulfills everyone's needs. But the easiest way to do that is to sort of to focus both our development and our infrastructure around these popular routes. I think that it's much easier to connect all of these things and to support bus lines that run more frequently when we have a certain level of density around them. So we need to look at all of this together, not just where do we put our bike stations and our, but also where we allow additional density.
Perfect.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Oh, I'm Matt Benjamin, and I'm running for Boulder City Council. There is a lot of synergy between many of us candidates talking about multi-mobility and increasing bike, but I thought I'd start by asking a question. How many rode their bike here today? Right, just a handful of us rode our bike here today. And so part of this conversation isn't just about ideas, it's also about, are we actually following through those ideas with our actions? And I think it's really critical that we do that. And as we think about rideshare and improving our biking community, it's really vital that we think of housing, transportation as part of a climate resiliency plan, because these are all really about climate action. And to reduce 50 or 60,000 daily in commuters, as has been said, it's housing, but it's the quality of the housing, not necessarily the quantity. When we think of new housing developments, we should think about how are we eliminating or dramatically reducing parking minimums at these housing developments to reduce the dependency on vehicles. That is critical, because if we are building for the next 20, 30, 50 years of our community, we should think about what that community should be like, limiting vehicles and single occupancy. We should be electrifying a lot of our infrastructure around parking and where cars are. I think we absolutely need to start thinking about some of our larger arteries and how we can bifurcate and split from bikes to cars until we actually build real infrastructure, not painted lines, real infrastructure around bike lanes. We're not actually fostering a community that's going to eventually depend on and utilize biking as a main mode of transportation throughout our community. And so how do we pay for this? Well, we pay for this through some of the things that have been said with regards to some of our infrastructure taxes. But also more importantly, this is why I support creating a library district. That saves the city $10 to $14 million. That's a lot of money to invest back in the people and back in the infrastructure that sets us up for success in the future. So there's a lot of things we can do holistically when we don't look at individual subjects like transportation or housing in a silo, but treat them in the grander scheme of this whole community, and we have an opportunity to get where we need to go.
Perfect, thank you.
Hi, I'm Nicole Spear. And one of the things I just wanted to start out with is just saying thank you for all that you all are doing to build up some of this infrastructure and some of the processes here. I think we're all grateful for it because you're going to make our jobs easier. So thank you for what you're doing. As a neuroscientist, especially, exercise is one of the best things we can all do for our mental health, for our cognitive function. And so all the work that you're doing to kind of promote bicycling and walking and all these kinds of things are really good in many ways for our community. I really like some of the things that I'm seeing going on now along Highway 119, Highway 7, Arapahoe Diagonal Highway, with this kind of collaborative effort to go and get some federal funding, state funding, local funding in order to build up some more infrastructure in these places that's going to expand people's ability to take alternatives to their cars when they're coming into town. That I've worked in the research world for a while, had some experience getting federal grants and things like that. And the best way to do that is by building these collaborative groups that can really come together to solve some of these problems. So I think that that's where some of that funding can come for, because some of the projects that we're needing to build up this infrastructure are really expensive. And in order to get there, we're really going to have to band together with other communities, with the state and with the federal government in order to have that funding to be able to do that work. And then I'm just going to echo what everybody else has said about housing. It's a great way to decrease in commuters, to let more people live here. But there are some people that just don't want to live here. And so we do need to be thinking about, what are those ways that we're helping people get into our community if they work here but don't live here, or even just if they're coming here to play rather than work. Am I just about done?
15 seconds.
Oh, 15 seconds. Okay, that's really all I have. So thank you for all your work.
Thank you. So next round, and Steve, if you can take it on, and please don't forget to introduce yourself.
Okay, I'm Steve Rosenblum, I'd say the first time. So how do we create more safety? I think that I agree that's the biggest barrier. So I was in New York for 20 years. When I started there were these white painted bikes everywhere where a cyclist would be killed and they would strap into that location. So one of my friends was severely injured and I decided to get involved with transportation alternatives, which was pushing for what Community Cycles is trying to do to make biking safer. And over those 20 years, they made enormous differences, created protected bike lanes, increased penalties for reckless driving. And by the end of it, I could get from my home in Brooklyn to my work in Midtown Manhattan all unprotected bike rides. So we can get there here. Biking needs to be the safer, cheaper, and more convenient option to actually have people do it. So we've got great east-west bike lanes along the creeks, but I don't feel comfortable my daughter going north-south with a painted line. So let's be bold. Let's make it a little less convenient for your car and a lot safer for alternatives by trying it out. I know it was tried a couple of years ago, but I think we've recognized we're that much farther into climate change. The other thing, it's got to be safe. You know that you're going to be safe on a bike path. And when you get there locking up your bike, it's not going to get stolen. I know a lot of people who are uncomfortable taking their bikes and they don't want to lock up their bike somewhere and know it's not going to be there when they get back. So we need to work on both those ones.
I'm Michael Christie, and I too am running for city council. And again, I feel like we're just repeating ourselves. To me, how do you get more people on their bikes? It's safety, safety, safety. To me, that is paramount. I am an avid cyclist. I bike with my child to school every day, unless it's a heavy snow. And I can tell you, I have had too many close calls riding down Pine Street where I've had people come up behind my boy and lay on their horn, and they don't know what type of reaction they're going to get from a child on a bicycle. And luckily, we've not had any close calls, but those startling moments when you're watching your child on a bike in a line of traffic it sends a message home, and it's loud and clear. To me, it's about safety. I would like to see first of all, I'd like to see the biking infrastructure expanded, more bike lanes. Again, to Matt's point, not just with painted lines. If you look at what other cities are doing, for example, Washington, D.C., they have beautiful bollards that they have placed up to protect their bike lanes. They're painted with local artists. It makes you want to get on your bike and ride in that lane when you see stuff like that. I think we can do that here in Boulder. Again, to me, it's all about safety. When you look at what the 2019, the low stress walk and bike plan has very detailed maps of what they are planning for improvements and expansions of the biking infrastructure here in Boulder. It looks great to me, but again, I would like to see more of the bollards placed on what they have already designated in this plan. Because to me, I think not only do the bollards allow for safety for the bicyclist, but it also brings attention to a driver when you're driving past. And whether that bollard is a plastic reflector pole that stands up or a cement barrier, but we've got to improve on the safety to get more people on their bikes. Thank you.
Thank you.
I agree with you, Michael. I'm Tara. And I would say that when I drive up Baseline on my e-bike, once I hit those bollards, is that how you pronounce it? I feel safe and secure. I relax. But before that, I'm a little bit petrified what's going to happen, because not that people mean to hit you, but they are texting when they drive. It's just the reality of what people do. I want to talk for a minute. I don't want to repeat everything everyone said. So I want to talk about bike tunnels for a minute. Personally, me, short, small, I get really unnerved when I drive into a dark tunnel. I'm just unnerved. I don't know if it's because I'm from Brooklyn and whatever the case is, but I'd like to see well-lit bike tunnels that are safer. And I feel like it would not be a bad thing if they were some sort of a security system where if something happens to you, you can press a button, or maybe there are cameras. I get nervous about that. I feel like when I go door to door, a lot of women had mentioned to me lately, they're nervous to ride bikes for safety reasons, not just because you're more vulnerable when you're on a bike. So I suggest better security. I also would like to see a variety of e-bike incentives and programs, including we're doing that already. The e-bikes are more available, so that's fantastic. I don't even need to say that. I would like to see bike racks with enhanced security at all bus stops as well. Increase the number of secure bike racks overall. And like you said, people should not be worried that when they get out of where they're shopping from, that their bike is not going to be there anymore. I'm, of course, more north-south bike paths along 28th Street and 30th Street to discourage those SOE trips. I know that I would get out there way more on my bike if I felt safe and secure.
Great. Thank you so much.
So my name is Lauren Folkerts, and you will all be shocked to know that I'm also running for city council. So let's see. I think something that Erica, you said, or sorry, Elaine, Elaine, that you said earlier is really important. That the number of people biking is a really important factor to bike safety. There is a certain amount of critical mass that will bring an additional level of safety. So beyond looking at north-south bike lanes, we really need to get more people out there, and we need to make sure that it is accessible to a wide variety of people in our community. So e-bikes, I think, are a critical portion of that because it allows people who might not otherwise consider themselves cyclists to get out there. And making sure that we have, potentially ways to charge e-bikes in the middle of the day while you're at work at secure locking stations, I think is really important. We also should be looking at multiple ways to design bike lanes. Right now, typically we have sort of, the gold standard, the separated bike lane that is completely off the road, and we have the painted stripe. There are like 10 more variations that we could have in between those things that would help provide a level of safety. So we know with Folsom that there was a lot of community pushback, but I think we need to sort of re-look at that street and see what other options we can come up with to help create a level of safety there, because it is critical that we create some north-south connections that feel good for all of us.
Thank you.
So I'm Matt Benjamin, and I think what we have to remember a little bit is we're coming through COVID. We're still in it. And if we've learned anything through this pandemic, is that life didn't come to a halt. It slowed a little bit. And it's okay that life slowed. We took our time to get to places. And as a result, one of the big things that I really want to advocate is slower speed limits throughout a lot of our community. Because we're slower, we're safer. But also what's important, as reported by Boulder B-Cycle, and I've heard around the community, ridership is more than doubled in our community since the start of the pandemic. We have to harness that. We can't just go back to the way things were. There's a lot of things that COVID has delivered for us and created that I want to hold on to. And a more than doubled ridership, I want to hold on to that. But in order to do that, we have to lower the barrier of entry for people to feel like they can ride safely in our community. So I'd really be bold and say, if we're going to see more than double ridership, we should more than double the investment in infrastructure for protected bike lanes. I mean, it's really just that simple. This is the need the community is showing they want, and we as elected servants need to meet that need and rise to the occasion. Not in 5 years, not in 10, but now. We do have the resources to do that, and this is where we take those actions. So between lowering speed limits and protecting those bike lanes, it's critical we make those investments. These are values that we carry as a community, wanting to be multimodal, wanting to be healthy, and wanting to use our bicycles. It's time we invest in those values in order to take our community where we're headed.
All right, trying to position myself well so that I'm not with the light in my eyes, but people can still see me. So I just want to thank you again. I have learned a lot from being here and talking with you today. And one of the things that I have learned is that groups like you that are doing this work in the community, you already have the ideas. So you don't really need new ideas. You just need support for the ideas that you're implementing. And some of the things I heard today that I am super excited about and will kind of carry forward with me are things like corporate partnerships that are decreasing the cost to employees and providing a benefit to the employees to encourage them to make more use of these things that are already existing in our community. Regional partnerships that will help people from Longmont use these kinds of things to get to Boulder. So I think all of those are great. And just as somebody with a background in science, I am so excited about all the data that you all are getting from the B-Cycle apps, from the Line apps, because that's giving information about how people are moving around our community. It's telling us where people are using which types of devices, how long the trips are, those kinds of things. It's also going to tell us what paths and sorts of things are people using, because those to me are the places where people are feeling comfortable. And we know that if they're using this particular path a lot, that feels really good. Let's figure out what is that path about that we can do more of to make people feel better about that. I echo your comment about Amsterdam. I got to visit 3 or 4 years ago, seeing parking garages for bikes was amazing. And the way they got there was by designing for bikes rather than cars. So I'd like to see that. And I also think we need to be thinking about what happens then to our infrastructure as our climate continues to warm, as we have more and more days where the weather is just beyond what people are willing to ride in. How are we designing for the future so that people are still going to want to do all this as our climate warms? Thank you.
Well, thank you guys so much. That was very great information, and we appreciate you taking the time to be here. As we've said, this will be recorded, or it has been recorded, so we'll be able to share that with more members of our community. Speaking of Highway 119, along with the Longmont Chamber, Boulder Chamber and Boulder Transportation Connections are hosting another session on Monday. Some of you may have already seen the concept design for the bikeway, and there are still some issues of, what happens as it reaches a community, or to, Tara's point about underpasses. I've had to express concern of what if the link from the middle of the diagonal to Niwot was only an underpass? It's like, no, no, I wouldn't use something like that because there's not enough people around. So these kind of considerations, I think, are very important. So Boulder County is also soliciting your input online for the bikeway. So I will say I've been an early advocate of this because I once rode the diagonal to work. And then I stopped. And the length of my commute went from a half an hour to an hour because I'm on a bike that can ride on the Lobo, and I'm riding on the Lobo. And I do it. I do it most of the time. I drove today because bike week's coming up and I've got a lot of stuff to deliver. So, that's that funny reality we deal with. I also wanted to mention, I didn't have a slide for this. We'll be having another meeting in December. I haven't confirmed anything yet. My goal is that we would be talking about hydrogen fuel cells and the e-bikes. BTC helped Community Cycles on the recent distribution of 50 e-bikes to essential workers in our community. And I can't wait to hear more stories from these people. I've heard some feedback where it's been really an amazing opportunity because, as many of us know, e-bikes are not cheap. So it's great when I hear and see people using them, but I don't have one because I live in a condo and I have nowhere to store it. So there remain issues of how do we continue to spread something like that. Also, just a plug that not only do we have Bike to Work Day next week, October is what we call Go-tober. And this is another opportunity for people and businesses to log trips on the My Way to Go network. And 2 years ago, we would do this and have the competitions between the businesses. We focus on a few businesses. We've had to do that differently since last year. And yet what's really exciting is people were still participating. Locally, Rocky Mountain Institute almost always wins their category against everybody that participates. So that's pretty exciting. And they did it again last year because telecommuting is one of those things, because we believe in tools like shifting your commute times, compressed work schedules, and for many people, the hybrid work. Like I typically work from home. I came in today for this, but we're here at the chamber really only like 1 or 2 days a week, most typically. And again, BTC is here to help you on a variety of options, businesses. We do hope we'll be able to help with TDM plans going forward. We were very close to looking at mandatory trip reduction programs for businesses. That is not the case right now. However, I don't think we're going to have too much longer until we do need to have those because we no longer meet federal air quality standards in the area. Contact information for our guests today. So please reach out to people if you need more information. And otherwise, may I just say thank you. And
Thank you.
thank you so much for being here.
Can I ask you, so I've done a number of races in and around like Boulder and the Reservoir, not on 119 and 36. And I find that, you know, generally I'm on a road bike, but like the side roads are pretty full of debris. And I find particularly on 36, if you're riding and you're trying to avoid something, is there efforts being made to like keep those bike lanes clean? Or is it just a matter of you get what you get and you try to do your best to not fall
Yeah,
apart?
your best bet is constantly being in touch with the agency in charge of the road. So within the city, they have a great close call or pothole hotline that, you know, for instance, last summer I was riding my bike on Walnut, and you may realize the intersection here is activated by bikes, and it did not work like that last year. And I thought, well, this is terrifying because if you're accustomed to that, when infrastructure doesn't work, I called it in, they had it fixed the next day. So I really appreciate that responsiveness. Boulder County does try to get out to sweep roads. You know, I'm always pushing like, hello, don't you want to sweep more roads before bike to work day, for instance, especially that get the usage. But it's definitely worth letting them know about certain things.
I wonder if any council members are know anything about that, the huge federal infrastructure bill. Is that, I've heard so many different things about what that's going to go towards. You guys happen to know anything about, is that going towards micromobility or other alternative forms?
Well, so Sarah, so I'm going to steal a bunch of data. Don't be impressed. Of the 1.2, I think it was 39 billion is specifically dedicated toward public transit, and then 11 billion is dedicated toward safety, infrastructure safety. So I don't know the answer to this, but I would assume that of that 11 million or 11 billion, that could be dedicated toward improving biking infrastructure.
Mm-hmm.
No, that's fast, yeah.
Yeah, so I can add to that, one of the things that I know in talking to Steve Fenberg and some others in the legislature, that there's hope that they can do some matching funds efforts, that some of that money that gets funneled to the state level, that they'll parse that out on a matching fund basis, that if you as a community can say, hey, we got 2 million, they'll say, well, we'll match that too. And you can leverage that to have to meet some of those needs. So there's various different levels in which they're trying to leverage those dollars with dollars raised in local communities to try to maximize those investments.
Okay, because I know, like, I got real excited and people in my industry did, and then I saw some things on Twitter that said, oh, actually, so much isn't going towards bike, you know, so I just kind of confused, but thanks for the
Well, because of the pandemic, the transportation department lost, I think it was $4.5 million. But over the past 2 years, 2019 through the end of 2020, Boulder also received 5.3 million in federal grants. So it's like this constant churning of what goes out, got to get more in, what goes out, got to get more in. But it's, to me, you know, collectively, I think we all agree, like safety is a top priority. We've got to get the funding to do that.
And when does that funding come? For any idea? Is that
Nothing's passed yet. They're fighting about it.
Yeah.
So there's an infrastructure bill that's settled, and there's a budget, $3.5 trillion maybe, that they're still fighting over.
I've been watching that, but I get, it gets kind of like down the
But
rabbit
keep in
hole.
mind, the state has passed money in the recent legislative session, in the recent budget, that is going to do more for communities. So I think we'll start to hear more about that in the first quarter of next year, of what that looks like. I don't know how much, but I know that there's some to address some of those things.
That's great.
They also passed like that now for any like car infrastructure has to be matched by a certain percentage in terms of alternative infrastructure. So that'll help a lot in terms of getting great projects done.
And I have a question for all of you, like, are there lobbying efforts being made to our state legislatures to increase funding to help us get the grants, the money that we need?
I can ask that question.
Yeah. Yeah, I'm a little sorry Kurt had to leave because he's very active on the Community Cycles Advocacy Committee. I participate in those meetings, but feel like I have to kind of step back. However, I keep some of my activity up on county type programs for that. But groups like People for Bikes are definitely very invested. America Walks. So there are national organizations, Bicycle Colorado as well, who all have had an active voice because, you know, as you're saying, seeing this, and, you know, I also believe initiatives like Vision Zero, because one of the saddest facts of this last year is that the people who continued to drive drove faster. And so the rate of crashes actually increased during the last year. My first perception is I don't think that the rate of crashes went up in Boulder.
Feels like it. Seems like every day.
Well, I mean, in comparison, Boulder did not have as many crashes during 2021. Some of the ones that happened were pretty bad. And, you know, I say this because I do get to review those crashes. You know, this year I do not have the information, but it's very fascinating to me that there's always a shift of the nature of crashes, and when the city is able to release that safe street report before the end of the year, please review it, check it out, and see, you know, what are these trends, because that's a great tool for we as the community, the members of council, to make those informed decisions.
And Elaine, do you attribute that to the Vision Zero project or plan or?
The change?
Yep.
So my understanding is in Boulder, the bicycle ridership as a whole actually was flat from, say, 2020 to 2021, which means, yeah, there were a few more people out riding, but, you know, people like me who come into Boulder and then ride around, there were fewer of us out there. So definitely people within the community. Many of you may realize it's also been very hard to get a bike. It took my husband 10 months to get a bike this past year.
Can I also say, for the rest of the year, what efforts, or are there any efforts being made? I don't want to say to educate the cyclists, but for example, Steve and I did the Wednesday Velo ride yesterday, and
I got dropped.
there were probably 70 people on the ride, and there were a good handful that were not staying inside the bike lane, and we're riding during rush hour traffic. And I thought, man, you need to get back in the lane, get back in the lane. And there's always that dynamic of drivers don't like bikers, bikers don't like drivers. And you sort of see some of that aggressiveness with some of these drivers coming up in their big diesel trucks, and they'll get right next to you, and then they'll, you know, push on the accelerator. But are there efforts to educate the cyclist to, like, be on your best behavior, keep your eyes open, and stay in the lane? Because we always hear about, as a cyclist, you always hear about the cars, but you don't hear, what are we doing to help inform?
Bicycle Colorado did a whole program of those classes last year.
Bike-friendly driver classes.
Bike-friendly driver, but I thought they maybe did both. Did they just
They
do the drive?
Bicycle Colorado offers classes.
Mhm.
I will say, Community Cycles, we offered a commuting class last night, which I teach because I'm a certified bike instructor, and we didn't have a huge turnout, you know, but
Yeah,
I
I think
am-
that's a slightly different target. It's what Michael's talking about. That's why I have with that group that's more.
Yeah, it was kind of nuts.
And it's, yeah, I've spent more time on that. I'll like most years. I think it's a combination of, like, C4C, right, is pushing really hard to educate the driver well. At the same token, maybe this is a larger conversation with them than us, but yeah, there's a huge disconnect between, well, I've got a driver as a cyclist, so pay attention to me, right, whether I'm in that lane or not, right, whether I'm single file or three wide. And I just think it's,
I mean, it's
There's
hard
some, yeah,
because
yeah,
as a cyclist, you feel, I mean, and I'm guilty of this myself, like, you don't stop at every stop sign. You know, you do sort of a slow roll and then you're off. And when you're in a big group like that, to what you were saying, Sarah, like there's safety in numbers. When you get a large group like that, a lot of them aren't stopping. Like they're just breezing through and this is during rush hour traffic.
And Boulder Valley School District also does a program for bike education, which I used to participate in. And one of the beautiful things was I had a parent come up to me one day and said, I thought I knew a lot about biking. My kid came home and shared this with me. And I was thrilled to hear that, because for me, that's part of, what we're after, when we teach our kids the proper thing. And I always like to start with, bicycles are subject to the same rules as vehicles. They are treated like vehicles. So, but to your point, the compliance on rules seems to be, very similar, bikes to cars. So it's just that the drivers like to act like, I always obey the law. The bikes
People
too.
new to Boulder coming from other states, maybe that are not bike-friendly states, AKA California, Texas. Because anytime someone just is honking their horn, I'm not doing anything wrong, but they're honking their horn at me. They're not used to bikes being on the road or anything. It's always Texas license. It's always an out-of-state license plate, and I always feel like it makes me so mad. Coming to our community that's trying to do good things, and then and then scare us on the road. Just like, like that's all right.
On the issue of following the rules and getting people to slow down, there's a statewide preemption on unmanned speed cameras that we need to lift. So you can keep, we have the unmanned cameras if you run a red light, but we need to put, because the technology's there on the arteries. You go faster than the speed limit, you automatically get a ticket mailed to you. And we can't do that right now because we can't do a lot of things for the statewide preemption, but we work to get that lifted and, be a leader.
And I'm such an advocate for trying to keep speeds down, because, even driving something like the diagonal has become really scary because of those speeds travel.
There's also a lot that we can do from the design side, right? Like there's a lot of studies that suggest equally spaced trees along streets like that will have a dramatic impact on speeds and stuff like that. So I think that, not only do we need to look at that from the enforcement side, but we really need to look at it from like how we are designing our streets in our community.
Yeah, absolutely. Again, Laura just has it nailed. It's just so funny to even know what they have as far as infrastructure has not happened over here. For whatever reason.
It's just it's the will to do it.
Yes.
No, they were built, the Amsterdam was built in the 1300s before the car. Our cities were built for the car, so we.
Yeah, but they actually embraced bikes in like the 70s.
Yeah. they
All of that
have-
infrastructure, I mean, to be fair, smaller distances, different structure, but the 70s was really when they decided they wanted bikes and they built for the bikes.
We could do it, it's just
I read that
different.
recently.
We get
Yeah.
canceled, I think.
I thought it was-
Because I also thought it was, just
Yeah, they went automobile centric and then back.
Yeah.
So it's not like.
Well, yeah, so-
And they had their pain points of
Yeah.
making that shift, just like we have.
In Paris too, Paris just is doing phenomenal things right now.
And London.
Speed limits to 20 around the city.
Yeah, and they're just, there's just amazing things happening.
Thank you. to all of you.
Thank you all.
Yeah.
I really appreciate you being here today.
Thank you, Lynn.
Thanks for setting this up.